Number 15. The spacecraft comma catastrophe. Imagine you've spent years, billions of dollars, and countless brain cells designing a spacecraft to explore Mars. It launches, it travels millions of miles, it gets so close to its destination, and then it just disintegrates. Why? Because someone forgot to convert pounds to newtons. Yep, that's exactly what happened to NASA's Mars Climate Orbiter in 1999. One team at Lockheed Martin was using imperial units, pounds force, for their thruster calculations, while the NASA navigation team was expecting metric units, newtons. It sounds like a joke, right? Like a bad punchline to a very expensive engineering exam. But this tiny, almost comical error in unit conversion meant that the spacecraft veered off course by about 60 miles, entered Mars' atmosphere at the wrong angle, and became a very shiny, very expensive puff of smoke. It was a billion-dollar oopsie, a cosmic reminder that details matter, especially when you're literally trying to touch another planet. Basically, if your elementary school math teacher told you units were important, they were preparing you for interstellar tragedy. Number 14. The Titanic's binocular blunder. You know the story of the Titanic. Unsinkable ship, iceberg, tragic ending. But did you know a tiny, almost unbelievable mistake might have sealed its fate before it even left the dock? The ship's crow's nest lookouts, Frederick Fleet and Reginald Lee, didn't have binoculars. Apparently, the man who was supposed to hand over the key to the binocular locker, Second Officer David Blair, was transferred off the ship at the last minute and forgot to hand over the key. He even mentioned it in a postcard later, casually noting he'd left the key in his cabin. So, as the Titanic sped through the icy North Atlantic, two men whose literal job it was to spot danger ahead were squinting into the vast darkness, relying solely on their naked eyes. If they'd had those binoculars, they might have spotted the iceberg a few crucial minutes earlier, giving the crew enough time to avoid the collision, or at least lessen its impact. It's the ultimate missing key tragedy, proving that sometimes even the most monumental disasters can hinge on something as mundane as forgotten optics. Basically, the unsinkable ship was sunk by a case of, oops, left my glasses at home. Number 13. Chernobyl's test gone terribly wrong. Imagine an emergency drill where the procedure itself causes the emergency. Sounds like something out of a darkly comedic bureaucracy manual, right? Well, that's essentially what happened at the Chernobyl nuclear power plant in 1986. The disaster wasn't caused by a rogue meteor or a mad scientist, but by a flawed safety test. Engineers were trying to see if the reactor's turbines could still generate power during a shutdown, a coast-down test, to keep the cooling pumps running. However, they bypassed multiple safety systems, ignored crucial warnings, and operated the reactor at dangerously low power levels, making it unstable. It was a chain reaction of human error, arrogance, and a disregard for established protocols, all under the guise of safety improvement. When they finally hit the emergency shutdown button, it ironically triggered a massive power surge that caused the reactor to explode, leading to the worst nuclear disaster in history. Basically, they were trying to check if the fire extinguisher worked, and accidentally burned down the whole building. Number 12. The Great Boston Molasses Flood Sticky Situation. Imagine a giant wave of something sweet and sticky, a thick, brown tsunami, barreling down a city street at 35 miles per hour, knocking over buildings and drowning people. Sounds like a scene from a bizarre cartoon, right? But this was horrifyingly real. In 1919, in Boston, a massive molasses storage tank burst. Why? A tiny crack? Some shoddy construction? And a seriously warm day combined to create one of the strangest and deadliest industrial accidents in history. The tank, holding over 2 million gallons of molasses, had been leaking for a while, but locals just assumed it was normal. The company, Purity Distilling, apparently just painted over the leaks. On that fateful day, a sudden temperature spike, from 2 degrees F to 40 degrees FF, caused the molasses to expand, putting immense pressure on the poorly constructed tank. When it finally ruptured, the syrupy tide tore through the north end, killing 21 people, injuring 150, and causing widespread destruction. It wasn't an act of God. It was a testament to negligence in ignoring tiny, sticky warnings. Basically, it was a killer dessert, proving that even sweetness can be deadly if you cut corners. Number 11. The Challenger disaster's O-ring oversight. For years, NASA was a symbol of unwavering precision and groundbreaking success. Then came the Space Shuttle Challenger disaster in 1986. 7 astronauts lost their lives, and the entire nation watched in horror. The cause? A tiny rubber O-ring in one of the solid rocket boosters. This small, critical component was designed to seal the joints, but engineers at Morton Thiokol, the company that built the boosters, had warned that it wouldn't seal properly in cold weather. The night before the launch, temperatures dropped below freezing, far colder than the O-rings had ever been tested for. Despite explicit warnings and desperate pleas from the engineers, NASA management, under pressure to stick to the launch schedule, overruled their concerns. That morning, cold temperatures caused the O-rings to become brittle and fail to seal, allowing hot gases to escape and ignite the external fuel tank. The resulting explosion destroyed the shuttle just 73 seconds after liftoff. It was a tragic reminder that sometimes the smallest part and the biggest ignored warning can lead to the most catastrophic failure. Basically, an executive decision to ignore a literal rubber stamp of disapproval led to a fiery tragedy. Number 10. The Tacoma Narrows Bridge's wobbly dance. Ever seen a bridge twist and contort like it's doing a really bad interpretive dance before dramatically collapsing? That's what happened to the Tacoma Narrows Bridge in 1940. Affectionately nicknamed Galloping Gertie, this suspension bridge became famous not for its structural integrity, but for its incredibly wobbly, undulating movements in even moderate winds. The engineers made a tiny, fatal design oversight. They built it too light and too narrow, and crucially, they didn't account for a phenomenon called aeroelastic flutter. They thought rigidity was key, but they created a structure that resonated dangerously with the wind, absorbing its energy rather than letting it pass through. On November 7, 1940, a relatively mild wind, only 42 miles per hour, hit the bridge at just the right frequency, causing it to twist violently for hours before it finally tore itself apart. No human lives were lost in the collapse, but it was a spectacular and embarrassing lesson in fluid dynamics and structural engineering. Basically, the bridge had an undiagnosed dance fever, and the wind was its favorite DJ. Number 9. The Great Smog of London's Deadly Air. Imagine waking up to a city so choked with pollution that you can't see your hand in front of your face, and then realizing this wasn't just fog, but a killer. In December 1952, London experienced its infamous Great Smog, an environmental disaster that at first seemed like an extreme weather event. For 5 days, a thick, yellowish blanket of smog smothered the city, halting transport and causing widespread chaos. But this wasn't just inconvenient. It was deadly. The smog was a toxic cocktail of smoke from coal fires, used for heating homes, industrial emissions, and vehicle exhaust, all trapped close to the ground by a temperature inversion. The tiny mistake? A continued reliance on highly polluting coal for heating and industry, combined with inadequate regulations and a lack of public awareness about the true dangers of air pollution. Estimates suggest the immediate death toll was around 4,000. But over the following weeks and months, respiratory illnesses linked to the smog pushed the total to an estimated 12,000 or more. It was a silent, suffocating killer that slowly opened the world's eyes to the invisible dangers of industrial waste. Basically, London accidentally invented a really terrible, slow-motion gas chamber for itself. Number 8. The Tay Bridge disaster's gusty demise. Imagine a brand new cutting-edge bridge, the longest in the world at the time, collapsing into an icy river during a storm, taking a train full of passengers with it. This wasn't just bad luck. It was a tragic lesson in engineering hubris. In December 1879, the Tay Bridge in Scotland collapsed during a violent gale, killing all 75 people on board a passenger train. The tiny mistakes? The chief engineer, Thomas Booch, made several critical oversights. He underestimated the wind loads the bridge would face, opting for a design that was too light and used weaker cast iron for crucial structural elements, which proved brittle in the cold. There were also allegations of shoddy workmanship during construction, including poorly cast iron columns and inadequate bracing. Just hours before the collapse, railway workers had reported alarming rattling and vibrations. It was a series of small, ignored details, and an underestimation of nature's power that led to a monumental failure. Basically, the Tay Bridge decided it preferred to be a submarine during a windy evening, taking everyone with it. Number 7. The new Coke blunder's sweet failure. Ever wonder what happens when a massive company makes a tiny change to a beloved product and it blows up in their face? Welcome to the epic, sweet, and ultimately disastrous tale of New Coke in 1985. Coca-Cola was losing market share to Pepsi. So, in a move of corporate panic, or genius, depending on who you ask, they decided to change their sacred 99-year-old formula. They spent millions on taste tests, which showed people actually preferred the new, sweeter formula to both original Coke and Pepsi. The tiny mistake? They overlooked the profound emotional and psychological connection consumers had to the idea of Coca-Cola, its history, its nostalgia, its unchanging nature. People didn't just drink Coke, they loved what it represented. When New Coke launched, the backlash was instant and furious. Calls poured in, protests erupted, and Old Coke became a rallying cry. Within 79 days, Coca-Cola was forced to bring back the original formula, rebranded as Coca-Cola Classic. It's a textbook case of a company so focused on product improvement that it completely missed the point of what people actually bought. Basically, Coke proved that you can't just change people's taste buds. You have to change their entire childhoods. Number 6. The Mars Climate Orbiter's metric mix-up. Again, wait, didn't we just talk about a Mars mission failing due to unit conversion? Yes, we did, but that was the Mars Climate Orbiter. This one, my friends, is a different kind of celestial faceplant, illustrating how a tiny, almost philosophical error in communication can derail an entire space program. Remember the Mars Polar Lander launched in 1999, just months after its climate-studying cousin went splat? It was supposed to land on Mars, dig for water ice, and generally be awesome. But contact was lost during its descent, and it was never heard from again. The tiny mistake here wasn't just using the wrong units, but a lack of a robust, universally understood system for flagging and integrating critical data, and a failure to thoroughly review all software interfaces. Investigators later determined the most probable cause. The lander's software was programmed to interpret a signal from its landing legs, deploying as a confirmation that it had landed. In reality, the legs deployed about 130 feet above the surface, and the engines, thinking they were on the ground, shut off prematurely. This oversight in the software's logic, a tiny misinterpretation of a single sensor reading, sent the lander crashing to its doom. It's a stark reminder that even with redundant systems, if the fundamental language between components isn't perfectly clear, the universe has a way of showing you who's boss. Basically, the Mars Polar Lander thought it had arrived when it was still taking its shoes off, and the universe said, "Nope, not yet." Number 5. The War of the Oaken Bucket's absurd origin. Ever heard of a war started over a bucket? No, not a bucket of gold, or even a bucket full of incredibly rare, glowing space rocks. Just a plain old wooden bucket. Welcome to the completely absurd yet historically real War of the Oaken Bucket, fought in 1325 between the Italian city-states of Bologna and Modena. The tiny mistake, or rather the incredibly petty catalyst, was when Modenese soldiers snuck into Bologna, stole a rather ordinary wooden bucket from a city well, and took it back to Modena as a trophy. Bologna was, understandably, furious. But instead of just asking for it back or staging a mild diplomatic protest, they declared war. A full-blown medieval war, complete with armies, sieges, and thousands of casualties, all over a piece of common well-equipment. It's a prime example of how underlying political tensions, territorial disputes, and long-standing rivalries can explode into full-scale conflict over the most trivial of provocations. The bucket itself wasn't the reason for the war, but it was the spark that ignited a powder keg of resentment. And to this day, the original bucket is still in Modena, a proud and slightly embarrassing trophy. Basically, it was the world's most expensive game of finders keepers, losers weepers. Number 4. The USS Greenville's tourist trouble. Imagine you're a submarine captain, responsible for a multi-billion-dollar vessel and the lives of over 100 sailors. Then, you decide it would be a fun idea to let some civilian VIPs, including a few well-known celebrities, take the controls for a bit during a rapid surfacing drill. What could go wrong? A lot, as it turns out. In 2001, the USS Greenville, a fast attack submarine, was performing an emergency main ballast tank blow, a rapid ascent maneuver, near Hawaii, with several civilian guests in the control room. The tiny mistake? The captain, Commander Scott Waddell, allegedly rushed through the proper safety checks and, crucially, did not adequately check the periscope for surface contacts before initiating the ascent. He later stated he delegated the periscope check to a junior officer and allowed guests to sit in critical positions, possibly distracting the crew. As the submarine rapidly surfaced, it violently collided with the Japanese fishing training vessel Ehime Maru, slicing it in two and sinking it within minutes. 9 Japanese crew members and students were killed. It was a stark, tragic reminder that even small deviations from strict protocol, combined with a desire to entertain, can have devastating consequences in high-stakes environments. Basically, a naval joyride turned into a tragic lesson in don't let the tourists drive the bus, especially if the bus is a nuclear submarine. Number 3. The Space Shuttle Columbia's foam flaw. Imagine a tiny piece of something as seemingly harmless as foam breaking off during launch, hitting something, and then, days later, leading to a catastrophic disaster. Sounds like a sci-fi movie plot, right? But this was the tragic reality of the Space Shuttle Columbia disaster in 2003. During liftoff, a piece of insulating foam, roughly the size of a briefcase, broke off the external fuel tank and struck the leading edge of the shuttle's left wing. The tiny mistake? NASA engineers and management knew this foam shedding was an issue. It had happened on previous flights. But they categorized it as a turnaround issue, not a safety of flight issue. They believed it couldn't cause serious damage. During the mission, engineers even requested high-resolution images of the wing to assess the damage, but these requests were denied by management, who concluded there was no risk. When Columbia re-entered Earth's atmosphere 16 days later, hot atmospheric gases penetrated the damaged wing, destroying the shuttle and killing all 7 astronauts on board. It was a chilling example of how a known, seemingly minor defect, combined with organizational failures and a culture of complacency, can lead to devastating consequences. Basically, a glorified styrofoam cooler took down a space shuttle because bureaucracy said, "Nah, it'll be fine." Number 2. The Salem witch trial's Rye suspect. Imagine an entire community gripped by mass hysteria, accusing their neighbors of witchcraft, leading to hangings and widespread terror. While often attributed to religious fanaticism and social anxieties, a tiny biological mistake might have played a bizarre, unsettling role in the infamous Salem witch trials of 1692. Some historians and scientists propose that the accusers and victims might have been suffering from ergot poisoning. Ergot is a fungus that grows on rye, wheat, and other grains, especially in damp conditions. Consuming bread made from contaminated rye can cause symptoms like convulsions, hallucinations, crawling sensations on the skin, and paranoid delusions, all strikingly similar to the fits, torments, described by the accusers in Salem. The tiny mistake? A fungal infection on the rye crops, possibly exacerbated by the cold, damp climate of colonial Massachusetts, leading to contaminated food. This doesn't excuse the human cruelty or the societal paranoia, but it offers a chilling scientific explanation for some of the bizarre physical and mental symptoms that fueled the hysteria. Basically, it might have been less about actual witches and more about really bad bread giving everyone a very trippy, very public, bad trip. Number 1. The Flat Earth Society's stubborn belief. Okay, this one isn't about a historical disaster in the traditional sense, but it's a colossal ongoing human mistake with fascinating psychological roots. Imagine looking up at the sky, seeing satellites, knowing we've sent people into space, and still firmly believing the Earth is flat. The tiny mistake here isn't a single design flaw or a forgotten key, it's a fundamental error in cognitive bias and selective reasoning, magnified by the internet. Despite overwhelming scientific evidence, photographs from space, and centuries of astronomical observation, the Flat Earth Society and its modern adherents persist in their belief. They interpret every piece of counter-evidence as a conspiracy, a trick, or a misdirection by the globalists. Their arguments often stem from misinterpretations of simple observations, like water always finding its level, combined with an intense distrust of authority and mainstream science. It's a psychological phenomenon where deeply held beliefs become impervious to facts, proving that sometimes the biggest disasters aren't explosions or famines, but the complete breakdown of critical thinking. Basically, the biggest mistake isn't a design flaw, but a brain that prefers a comfy delusion to an inconvenient truth.